Imagine a scene that would rival any high-stakes confrontation in modern politics. A humble shepherd from the south, standing in the opulent northern sanctuary of Bethel, boldly challenging the religious elite. This isn't just any confrontation, it's a pivotal moment where Amos, the unexpected prophet, faces off against Amaziah, the established priest of Bethel. Amos, with his weathered hands and simple attire, stands in stark contrast to the ornate surroundings of Bethel's temple. However, it's not his appearance that's causing a stir, but his words. With the courage of a man driven by divine calling rather than human approval, Amos delivers a scathing critique of Israel's social and religious practices. Amaziah, the priest, finds himself in an unprecedented situation. An outsider from Judah is openly speaking against the king and the kingdom in their own holy place. It's a bold move that challenges the very foundations of the northern kingdom's power structure. The prophet's words are nothing short of an apocalyptic prophecy. The high places of Isaac will be destroyed, and the sanctuaries of Israel will be ruined. With my sword, I will rise against the house of Jeroboam. This isn't mere criticism. It's a divine indictment that threatens the core of Israel's religious and political establishment. Faced with this challenge to his authority and the status quo, Amaziah resorts to a tactic familiar in political and religious circles, discrediting the messenger. He accuses Amos of conspiracy, attempting to paint him as a troublemaker from the rival southern kingdom. It's a strategy often employed when the message itself cannot be refuted. Amos, however, stands firm in the face of this accusation. With unwavering conviction, he clarifies his position. He's not a professional prophet or part of any prophetic guild. Instead, he's a simple shepherd and fig farmer whom God has called for this specific purpose. His authority comes not from institutional backing, but from divine appointment. The confrontation reaches its climax as Amos, driven by the imperative of divine justice, turns the tables on Amaziah. He delivers a personal prophecy against the priest himself. His wife will be reduced to prostitution. His children will die by the sword, and he will meet his end in exile. It's a stark reminder that position and privilege offer no protection against God's judgment. This face-off at Bethel is more than a historical anecdote. It's a powerful illustration of the tension between institutionalized religion and prophetic truth. Amos, the outsider, becomes the voice of authentic faith, challenging the very structures that claim to represent God but have become compromised by power and complacency. The reaction of those witnessing this confrontation must have been mixed and intense. Some likely recoiled in shock. Others may have silently acknowledged the truth of Amos's words, while those in power probably seethed with indignation. It's a scene that encapsulates the often divisive nature of genuine prophecy and the high cost of speaking truth to power. Ultimately, this confrontation sets the stage for Amos's broader message of social reform and impending judgment. It serves as a compelling opening act that captures attention and establishes Amos as a prophetic voice that cannot be ignored. The shepherd from Tekoa has made his entrance, and the comfortable complacency of Israel's religious and social elite will never be the same. Amos's prophetic ministry wasn't limited to fiery speeches and confrontations. He also experienced a series of vivid, symbolic visions that formed the core of his apocalyptic prophecy. These visions, reminiscent of modern-day disaster movies, painted a grim picture of Israel's future. The first vision Amos receives is of a swarm of locusts. Just as the late crops are beginning to grow, Amos sees these voracious insects descending upon the land. It's a chilling image of impending devastation, one that would resonate deeply with an agricultural society. The locusts represent a force of destruction that leaves nothing in its wake. Following the locusts comes a vision of fire. Amos sees a great fire devouring the land, even consuming the depths of the sea. This isn't just a brush fire, it's an all-consuming blaze that threatens to destroy everything in its path. The imagery evokes the idea of divine justice as a purifying but terrifying force. The third vision presents a more subtle but equally ominous image, the Lord standing beside a wall with a plumb line. This builder's tool, used to ensure straight construction, becomes a symbol of God's judgment. The crooked wall of Israel's society will be measured against God's standard of righteousness and found wanting. These visions aren't just abstract symbols. Amos interprets them as concrete warnings for Israel. Each vision is followed by a dialogue between Amos and God, where the prophet intercedes for the people, pleading for mercy. It's a poignant reminder of the prophet's role as both bearer of bad news and intercessor for the people. The progression of the visions suggests an escalating severity of judgment. From locusts that can be shooed away, to fire that consumes everything, to a plumb line that exposes deep-seated flaws, the message becomes increasingly dire. It's as if God is giving Israel multiple chances to repent before the final judgment falls. Interestingly, these visions of destruction are balanced with glimpses of hope. After each of the first two visions, Amos successfully pleads for mercy, and God relents. It's only with the third vision that God's patience seems to run out. This pattern underscores the tension between divine justice and divine mercy that runs throughout the prophetic books. The symbolic nature of these visions allows them to transcend their immediate historical context. While they spoke directly to Israel's situation, their imagery of environmental disasters, consuming fire, and moral measurement continue to resonate with modern audiences grappling with issues of judgment and accountability. For Amos's contemporaries, these visions would have been deeply unsettling. They challenged the prevailing notion of Israel's special status as God's chosen people. The message was clear. Being chosen didn't exempt them from judgment, but rather held them to a higher standard of social reform and spiritual integrity. These apocalyptic visions serve as a wake-up call, not just for ancient Israel, but for all who encounter them. They remind us that complacency in the face of injustice and moral decay has consequences. The God who speaks through these visions is not a distant, unconcerned deity, but one who is deeply invested in the moral and spiritual state of his people. The story of Amos is a classic tale of an unlikely hero rising to prominence. Here's a simple shepherd from Tekoa, a small town in Judah, suddenly thrust onto the national stage as God's mouthpiece. It's like a ranch hand from a small Midwestern town being called to address Congress. Unexpected and potentially revolutionary. Amos wasn't born into the prophetic life. He wasn't part of the established prophetic guilds or schools. Instead, he was a shepherd and a dresser of sycamore figs. His hands were calloused from hard work, not from holding scrolls. This background is crucial to understanding the impact of his message and the authenticity of his voice. The historical context of Amos's call is significant. Israel was experiencing a time of unprecedented prosperity under Jeroboam II. The borders were expanded, trade was booming, and the upper classes were living in luxury. On the surface, it seemed like a golden age, but beneath this glittering exterior lurked deep-seated social injustice and religious hypocrisy. God's choice of Amos as his prophet in this context is both surprising and fitting. Who better to speak truth to power than someone utterly removed from the corridors of influence? Amos's outsider status gave him a unique perspective on the social ills plaguing the nation. His call to social reform came from a place of genuine concern, not political maneuvering. Amos's transition from shepherd to prophet wasn't a gradual process. He describes it as God taking him from following the flock and commanding him to prophesy. It's a dramatic shift that underscores the urgency of his message. The immediacy of his call mirrors the immediacy of the judgment he proclaims. The contrast between Amos's humble origins and the opulence of the society he addresses is stark. His simple lifestyle stands as a rebuke to the excesses of the wealthy. When he speaks of justice rolling down like waters, one can almost hear the echo of mountain streams from his shepherd days, a purity sadly lacking in the nation's moral landscape. Amos's rise challenges our assumptions about qualification for spiritual leadership. In a world that often values credentials and connections, Amos reminds us that God's criteria are different. Divine justice often comes through unexpected channels, challenging the established order and bringing fresh perspectives. The prophet's background also lends credibility to his harsh words against exploitation of the poor. Amos knew firsthand the struggles of common people. When he denounces those who trample on the needy, it's not theoretical, it's based on lived experience. His apocalyptic prophecy is grounded in a deep understanding of societal inequities. Interestingly, Amos never seems to lose sight of his roots. Even as he delivers messages of cosmic significance, he draws on imagery from his pastoral life. Lionesses and bears, harvests and vineyards, these motifs pepper his prophecies, grounding lofty concepts in accessible, earthy language. Amos's unlikely rise serves as a powerful reminder that God often works through the marginalized to challenge the center. His journey from the pastures of Tekoa to confronting kings and priests is a testament to the transformative power of divine calling. It's a story that continues to inspire and challenge, reminding us that profound change can come from the most unexpected places. Amos's prophecies are like a prosecutor's relentless case against a corrupt system. He doesn't just point out a few minor infractions, he systematically exposes the deep-seated sins of the nation. It's as if he's holding up a mirror to society, forcing them to confront the ugly reality behind their prosperity. At the heart of Amos's critique is the issue of social injustice. He doesn't mince words when he accuses the wealthy of selling the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. This vivid imagery drives home the point that human dignity is being traded for trivial luxuries. It's a call for social reform that resonates even in our modern context. The prophet's denunciation extends to religious hypocrisy as well. He scathingly remarks that the people love their religious festivals and solemn assemblies, but their worship is meaningless in light of their unjust actions. It's a powerful reminder that divine justice isn't satisfied with rituals devoid of righteousness. Amos's words hit particularly hard when he addresses the women of Samaria, whom he calls cows of Bashan. It's not a flattering comparison, likening these wealthy women to well-fed cattle, oblivious to the suffering around them as they demand more luxury from their husbands. This gendered critique adds another layer to his comprehensive indictment of society. The prophet doesn't spare the judicial system either. He laments that justice has been turned to wormwood and righteousness cast to the ground. It's a damning assessment of institutions meant to uphold fairness and equity. In Amos's eyes, the very foundations of society have become corrupted. Interestingly, Amos's denunciations aren't limited to Israel. He pronounces judgment on surrounding nations as well for crimes against humanity and breaches of basic moral codes. This universal application of divine justice underscores the idea that God holds all peoples accountable, not just his chosen nation. The relentlessness of Amos's critique is notable. He doesn't deliver one stinging sermon and call it a day. Instead, his prophecies build on each other, creating a comprehensive picture of a society that has lost its moral compass. It's an apocalyptic prophecy that leaves no stone unturned. Perhaps most uncomfortable for his audience is Amos's linking of their current prosperity with their moral failings. He points out their fine houses and lush vineyards, only to declare that they won't enjoy them due to their injustice. It's a stark warning that ill-gotten gains won't last in the face of divine justice. Amos's denunciations also challenge the people's understanding of their relationship with God. He dismantles their sense of security based on being the chosen people, warning that this status brings responsibility rather than immunity from judgment. It's a theological bombshell that shakes the foundations of their religious complacency. Throughout his relentless exposé, Amos maintains a clear purpose: to awaken the conscience of the nation and call them back to true righteousness. His harsh words aren't meant to condemn, but to correct. Even in his fiercest denunciations, there's an underlying current of hope. If only the people will heed the warning and return to justice and righteousness. Amos's prophecies of judgment are not vague warnings. They're specific and dire predictions about Israel's future. His apocalyptic prophecy paints a vivid picture of a nation on the brink of catastrophe, with divine justice poised to bring about a dramatic reversal of fortunes. The prophet doesn't shy away from graphic imagery. He speaks of corpses being thrown out in silence, of the songs in the temple turning to wailing, and of the sun going down at noon. These aren't just poetic flourishes. They're meant to shock his audience into recognizing the severity of their situation. Amos's predictions are particularly striking because they come at a time of national prosperity and military success. He foresees the destruction of Israel's altars, the collapse of great houses, and the exile of the people. It's a complete inversion of their current circumstances, challenging their sense of security and divine favor. The prophet's words about the day of the Lord are especially potent. He turns their expectation of this day as one of triumph on its head, describing it instead as darkness, not light. It's a theological reframing that must have been deeply unsettling to his listeners, upending their understanding of God's relationship with Israel. Amos doesn't just predict external destruction, he also foresees internal strife. He speaks of a time when God will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. This spiritual deprivation is presented as perhaps the most severe judgment of all. The specificity of Amos's predictions is noteworthy. He doesn't just say that bad things will happen, he outlines exactly how Israel will fall. He speaks of an enemy that will overrun the land, of people being taken away with hooks, and of the remnant being sifted among all nations. It's a comprehensive picture of national collapse. Interestingly, Amos presents these judgments as the direct action of God. The disasters aren't random events or merely the consequences of poor political decisions. They're portrayed as divine justice in action, with God actively bringing about the downfall of a nation that has turned away from his laws. The prophet's words about the survivors are particularly poignant. He speaks of them as like a brand plucked from the burning, emphasizing both the severity of the judgment and the narrow escape of the remnant. It's an image that balances the harsh reality of judgment with a glimmer of hope. Amos doesn't neglect the why behind the what of judgment. He consistently links the coming destruction with the people's sins, particularly their oppression of the poor and their religious hypocrisy. It's a clear cause and effect relationship that underscores the ethical basis of divine justice. The reaction to these prophecies, as recorded in the book, is telling. We see attempts to silence Amos, to send him away from the centers of power. It's a vivid illustration of how unsettling and unwelcome his message of impending doom was to a society convinced of its own security and righteousness. While Amos is often remembered for his harsh pronouncements of judgment, his prophecy doesn't end in unrelenting gloom. In a surprising turn, the final chapter of his book offers a vision of hope and restoration. It's as if, after the storm of divine justice, a rainbow of promise appears on the horizon. The prophet speaks of a time when God will restore the fortunes of my people Israel. This isn't just about economic recovery, it's a holistic restoration that encompasses the rebuilding of ruins, the replanting of vineyards, and the re-establishment of the people in their land. It's a powerful counterpoint to the earlier visions of destruction. Central to this promise of restoration is the image of the tabernacle of David being raised up. This metaphor carries rich, messianic overtones, hinting at a future where the Davidic dynasty is re-established in a way that transcends mere political restoration. It's an element of apocalyptic prophecy that points beyond the immediate future to a more cosmic fulfillment. Amos's vision of restoration isn't limited to Israel alone. He speaks of the remnant of Edom and all the nations who are called by God's name being included in this renewal. It's a surprisingly inclusive picture that expands the scope of divine justice to encompass a wider restoration of humanity. The prophet paints a picture of almost miraculous abundance in the restored land. He speaks of the plowman overtaking the reaper and the mountains dripping with sweet wine. These images of agricultural plenty serve as metaphors for the overflowing blessings of God's renewed favor. Interestingly, this promise of restoration doesn't negate the reality of the coming judgment. Rather, it offers hope beyond it. The message seems to be that while divine justice demands a reckoning with sin, it ultimately aims at redemption and renewal, not mere punishment. Amos's prophecy of restoration also includes the promise that the people will never again be uprooted from their land. This assurance of permanent settlement must have been particularly comforting to a people facing the threat of exile. It speaks to God's long-term commitment to his people, despite their failures. The language of restoration in Amos is active and dynamic. God is portrayed as the one who will plant them on their land. It's not just a passive allowing of return, but an active divine involvement in the process of renewal. This emphasizes the personal nature of God's commitment to restoration. This vision of hope serves as a powerful conclusion to Amos's message of social reform. It suggests that the goal of divine judgment is not destruction for its own sake, but a clearing of the ground for a more just and righteous society to be built. The restoration is thus linked intrinsically to the ethical demands made earlier in the book. Finally, the promise of restoration in Amos provides a template for hope in seemingly hopeless situations. It reminds readers that even in the face of impending disaster, there's a future beyond the current circumstances. This message of resilience and divine faithfulness continues to resonate with those facing personal or societal crises. The message of Amos, though millennia old, finds striking parallels in our modern world. His call for social justice and critique of empty religiosity resonate in an era marked by growing wealth, inequality, and public skepticism towards institutional religion. It's as if Amos stepped out of ancient Israel and into our nightly news broadcasts. Today's cows of Bashan might be found in the excesses of consumer culture and unchecked capitalism. Amos's denouncement of those who trample on the poor finds echoes in discussions about fair wages, ethical business practices, and corporate responsibility. His words challenge us to examine the moral implications of our economic systems. The prophet's criticism of religious hypocrisy remains painfully relevant. In an age where religious leaders sometimes make headlines for moral failures or are perceived as being too closely aligned with political power, Amos's call for authentic faith that manifests in ethical living is as necessary as ever. Amos's role as an outsider speaking truth to power resonates in our time of grassroots movements and citizen journalism. His example challenges us to consider whose voices we're listening to and whether we're open to uncomfortable truths from unexpected sources. It's a reminder that social reform often begins on the margins. The apocalyptic prophecy in Amos finds parallels in modern concerns about climate change, political instability, and social unrest. While we must be cautious about direct correlations, his warnings about the consequences of moral decay and social injustice offer a framework for understanding societal challenges from a spiritual perspective. Amos's insistence on divine justice in international affairs remains relevant in our globalized world. His oracles against nations surrounding Israel remind us that ethical standards and human rights are universal concerns, not limited by national boundaries. It's a message that speaks to our interconnected global community. The tension Amos navigated between pronouncing judgment and offering hope is reflected in contemporary struggles to balance critique with constructive solutions. His example offers a model for those seeking to be prophetic voices today, unflinching in naming wrongs, yet ultimately pointing towards restoration and renewal. Amos's use of vivid imagery and poetic language demonstrates the power of effective communication in conveying challenging messages. In our media-saturated age, his example encourages those with prophetic callings to find compelling ways to cut through the noise and capture people's attention and consciences. The prophet's emphasis on the ethical dimensions of faith challenges the modern tendency to compartmentalize spirituality. Amos insists that true religion must impact every aspect of life, from economic practices to social relationships. It's a holistic view that pushes against the privatization of faith. Finally, Amos's message reminds us of the enduring relevance of biblical prophetic literature. While the specific contexts may change, the underlying issues of justice, authentic worship, and societal ethics remain. Amos invites modern readers to see themselves as part of this ongoing story of divine justice and human responsibility. As we close this exploration of Amos's powerful message, it's clear that his words continue to challenge and inspire us today. The question is, how will we respond to this ancient yet timeless call for justice and authentic faith? Consider this. Where in your life or community do you see echoes of the injustices Amos condemned? Perhaps it's in workplace practices, social policies, or even in religious institutions. How might you be called to be a voice for the voiceless, like Amos was? Now, here's a challenge for you. In the comments below, share one way you plan to apply Amos's message of social justice in your own sphere of influence. Your insight could be the spark someone else needs to take action. Speaking of action, many of us struggle to maintain a vibrant faith that impacts our daily lives and society. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the call to live out your faith in meaningful ways, you're not alone. But here's some good news. Small, consistent steps can lead to significant change. That's why we've created our ebook, 30 Habits to Draw Closer to God. This isn't just another self-help guide. It's a practical roadmap designed to help you cultivate a faith that, like Amos's, is deeply connected to God and actively engaged in the world around you. Imagine starting each day with a renewed sense of purpose, feeling equipped to face societal challenges with faith and courage. Picture the impact you could have as you align your life more closely with God's heart for justice and mercy. Our ebook offers clear, actionable steps to make this a reality in your daily walk. The spiritual transformation you're seeking is within reach. Check out 30 Habits to Draw Closer to God now in the comments and start your journey toward a faith that doesn't just change you, but impacts the world around you. Remember, Amos shows us that one person yielded to God can make a profound difference. Don't miss out on more inspiring explorations of Scripture. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest videos. And hey, why keep this challenging message to yourself? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of God's heart for justice and authentic faith. Until next time, remember, the voice of truth and justice is needed as much today as it was in Amos's time. May we have the courage to hear it, heed it, and become voices of positive change in our world.